The film's final act begins with Adelaide Wilson on the search for her look-alike, Red, who has disappeared with the Wilson's son. Interestingly enough, Adelaide seems to know exactly where to go. This House of Mirrors, which we've seen in partial flashbacks throughout the film. Adelaide wandered into this funhouse when she was at the boardwalk as a kid, following a sign that read, "Find yourself." There, she encountered her double for the first time, and she was never quite the same afterwards. Now she's finally returning to the site of this traumatic experience. This time Adelaide goes deeper into the funhouse. An escalator then leads her further down the rabbit hole, into a strange hallway that's filled with more bunnies. They're the same rabbits we saw in the opening credits, but now they've been let out of their cages, and so have the tethered. The movie's opening titles told us that there are thousands of miles of tunnels running underneath the US. This presumably is one of those tunnels, where the tethered have lived underground all their lives. The climax of the film arrives when Adelaide finds Red and the two finally face off. The violence is intercut with flashbacks to both women as young ballerinas, one performing above ground and the other dancing down below. Finally, Adelaide gets the upper hand in their struggle. As she's in the midst of killing her double, we hear a lot of guttural sounds, the kind of sounds that the tethered use to communicate. These low, strangled noises evoke a dark sewage or underground, like the space that the tethered inhabit. But at this point, we're not sure whether those noises are coming from Adelaide or Red. It seems like Adelaide is adopting some of the characteristics of the tethered. Red, in her last moments, begins whistling Itsy Bitsy Spider. The eerie melody brings us back yet again to that childhood scene inside the funhouse, when young Adelaide whistled that tune, and heard her double whistle it back at her. This time, though, we're shown that flashback in its entirety, and now we know what really happened that night. Red had attacked Adelaide, dragged her underground, and handcuffed her to a bed, so that she could then take Adelaide's place in the real world. That's why at the time, Adelaide's parents initially didn't recognize this disturbed, mute version of their daughter. No wonder fake Adelaide was terrified to return to that beach as an adult. She knew the entrance to the portal was there, and she didn't want to ever go back. There were other signs too, like when fake Adelaide wasn't quite snapping on beat.
There you go.
Also, those strange inflections in her speech.
I feel like it moves, like she's getting closer.
Oh.
It also explains why the first thing the real Adelaide did to her longtime imposter was handcuff her. Fake Adelaide remains handcuffed for the rest of the movie, until their final confrontation when she manages to break free. This can only happen when she's finally slain the real Adelaide, at the same bed where she first put her in cuffs. It makes sense then that the real Adelaide was the only member of the tethered who could speak. We can see why they'd choose her as their leader. She had the strongest drive for revolution because she was determined to take back her life. The tethered's revolt is foreshadowed by the references to Jeremiah 11:11 throughout the film. This Old Testament verse describes God's revenge on covenant breakers. "I will bring on them a disaster they cannot escape, for I will not hear them in the time that they cry out to me." The tethered have never had their voices heard by those above ground. Perhaps that's why, when they finally get their revenge, they attack the throats of their targets, right around the voice box. In the flashback, we also see the two identical girls switch t-shirts. Red puts on Adelaide's Thriller tee, which is one of a few Michael Jackson references in the film. Another is the single glove worn by each member of the tethered. Peele said these Easter eggs were very much deliberate, as he considered MJ the patron saint of duality, which...
Pause. This reminds me of the Doubler God that we have been taught to serve. God is a doubler of creation. And also our weather system uses the Doppler radar. And we know they control the weather. So are we receiving creation's weather?
Yes, I do.
In us, the people who are on the losing side of those gaps come to claim what is rightfully theirs. They're an underclass, literally, deprived of sunlight and forced to eat rabbits for sustenance, while their counterparts above them enjoy nice meals and material comforts.
Hey, I think it's vodka club.
The shadowy existence of the tethered is reflected in some of their names. Jason's devil is called Pluto, as the god of the underworld in Roman mythology. Interestingly enough, the planet Pluto got its name because it's so far from the sun that it exists in perpetual darkness. It makes sense then that, as an inhabitant of the underground, Pluto is obsessed with fire and the bright light it provides. He's such a pyromaniac that he seems to have burned much of his face in a past incident, and ultimately dies by self-immolation. Meanwhile, the sister Zora's double is called Umbri, the plural form of Umbra, which means the darkest part of a shadow during the total phase of an eclipse. Adelaide described herself as the shadow self of her imposter. The tethered have long been relegated to the darkness and rendered invisible, and for the people above them, it's most comfortable that way. The horror of us is that the people at the bottom are rising above to settle the scores. It's a very American nightmare, which explains the double-edged meaning of its title. It's us, but also US. The people above ground don't view the tethered within either of those constructs. They're not us, but them, other, alien trespassers. In reality, though, they've been there all along. You might notice that us and Get Out both begin and end with a car ride.
I said, boom, please study NASA and stem cells.